September 17, 1940. 4:47 p.m. Over the Kent countryside at 12:00 feet, Flight Lieutenant James Ginger Lacey banked his Hurricane hard left as tracer rounds ripped past his canopy. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 on his tail belonged to Oberleutnant Franz von Vera, a German ace with 21 confirmed victories. Von Vera had shot down 4 Hurricanes that week alone. Lacey's fuel gauge showed 8 minutes of flying time. His ammunition counter read 0 rounds remaining. And yet somehow he was about to do something that would change how the Luftwaffe viewed the entire Royal Air Force. The German pilot was confident, too confident. Because what von Vera didn't know, what none of the Luftwaffe knew, was that the Hurricane pursuing them from below wasn't factory-built anymore. Before we continue with Ginger Lacey's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Kent, September 1940, where Ginger Lacey was about to demonstrate why British ingenuity was more dangerous than German engineering. James Lacey was nobody special. Born in Wetherby, Yorkshire in 1917, the son of a cattle dealer, he stood 5'7" in his flight boots and had been rejected by the Royal Air Force twice for being too short and lacking officer material. He finally got in through the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve in 1937, trained on obsolete biplanes, and arrived at RAF Squadron 501 in May 1940 with exactly 147 hours of flight time. The other pilots called him Ginger because of his red hair and his temper. He had a thick Yorkshire accent that the southern officers mocked. He'd never been to university. His father wanted him to take over the family livestock business. On his first combat patrol over Dunkirk, he vomited in his oxygen mask from fear and had to land early. But Ginger Lacey had one skill nobody else in the squadron possessed. He'd spent 3 years as an apprentice mechanic at Yorkshire Aeroplane Club before he could afford flying lessons. He knew engines, he understood metal fatigue, stress points, weight distribution. And by September 1940, that knowledge was about to become the difference between life and death. Because between July 10th and September 15th, 1940, the Luftwaffe shot down one 033 Royal Air Force aircraft over Britain. The mathematics were brutal. Fighter Command was losing planes 40% faster than factories could replace them. Pilots were being killed at a rate of 23 per week. The average life expectancy of a new Spitfire pilot was 4 days. For Hurricane pilots, it was 6 days. Squadron 501 lost 9 aircraft in 3 weeks. 9 planes, 7 pilots dead. The problem wasn't German accuracy. The problem wasn't British courage. The problem was that Hawker Hurricanes and Supermarine Spitfires were being flown exactly as designed, and the Luftwaffe had figured out how to kill them. Peter Cowboy Blatchford was the first one Ginger lost. Full name, Peter James Blatchford, age 22, from Cheltenham. Cowboy got his nickname because he wore a leather jacket his uncle sent from Texas and talked constantly about opening a ranch after the war. Blatchford and Lacey's flying ranch, he'd say. We'll give aerial tours, 50-50 split. They shook hands on it the night before a mission on August 24th. Cowboy died on August 25th at 3:17 p.m. over Maidstone. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 caught him in a climbing turn, the standard evasive maneuver taught at every RAF training school. The German pilot fired a 2-second burst. Cowboy's Hurricane broke apart at 9 aero feet. His body was found in a wheat field 3 miles from the wreckage. Ginger attended the funeral on August 27th. There were 11 other RAF funerals that same day at the same cemetery. Then Michael Richardson died on September 3rd. Same way, standard climbing turn, Bf 109 from above, 2-second burst, dead at 23 years old. Then Anthony Morris on September 9th. Same way. Then David Hewitt on September 12th. Same way. All of them died executing the exact defensive maneuver that RAF Fighter Command Tactical Doctrine required. When engaged by an enemy fighter from behind, execute a climbing spiral turn to force the enemy to overshoot. It should have worked. In theory, the Hurricane could outturn a Bf-109 at lower speeds. In theory, the climbing spiral would bleed off the German's energy advantage. In theory, the German would shoot past and become vulnerable. In practice, Luftwaffe pilots had figured out the pattern. They anticipated the turn. They led their target. They fired where the Hurricane would be, not where it was. And RAF pilots kept dying. September 13th, 1940. 11:40 p.m. Ginger Lacey sat alone in the dispersal hut at RAF Gravesend, staring at a Hurricane maintenance manual he'd borrowed from the ground crew. His hands still shook from that afternoon's mission. He'd survived another bounce from a Bf-109 only because the Germans' guns had jammed. The manual lay open to a page about control surface authority and airspeed. Standard stuff, basic aerodynamics. But something caught his eye. A footnote about the Hurricane's elevator effectiveness decreasing by 34% above 300 miles per hour due to airflow compression over the tailplane. That was the problem. When Hurricane pilots entered their standard climbing turn, they were already at high speed from the initial dive to engage. The climbing turn required smooth progressive elevator input to maintain the spiral without stalling. But at those speeds, the elevator was mushy, unresponsive. It took longer to establish the turn, and in that 2-second delay, the Bf-109 pilot had time to adjust his aim. Ginger knew exactly what needed to change. The Hurricane needed a faster rate of pitch control at high speed. It needed the elevator to bite harder, quicker, before the German pilot could react. But there was no way to increase elevator authority without changing the size of the tailplane. A structural modification that would take weeks in a factory and require Air Ministry approval, engineering reviews, test flights, bureaucratic paperwork. Except Ginger wasn't thinking about changing the tailplane. He was thinking about changing the airflow over it. At 12:15 a.m., he walked out to the flight line where his Hurricane, R4175, sat under camouflage netting. He carried a flashlight, a tape measure, and a pocket knife. The night was cold. There was a half moon. 2 ground crew sergeants were sleeping in a tent 50 yards away. What Ginger was about to do was completely against regulations. He measured the gap between the elevator and the horizontal stabilizer, 0.708 of an inch. Then he walked to the maintenance shed and found what he needed: a roll of fabric dope tape used for patching bullet holes, aluminum sheet metal from a damaged wing panel, and a pair of tin snips. For the next 47 minutes, working by flashlight, Ginger cut 6 strips of thin aluminum, each 11 inches long and 2 inches wide. He bent each strip into an L shape. Then, using the fabric tape and spare rivets, he attached the strips to the leading edge of his Hurricane's horizontal stabilizer, 3 on each side, creating small vortex generators that would energize the airflow and increase elevator effectiveness. It was a crude modification. It looked terrible. The aluminum strips were different colors, some green, some silver, salvaged from different aircraft. They weren't aerodynamically optimized. They weren't wind tunnel tested. They violated approximately 14 different Air Ministry regulations about unauthorized aircraft modifications. If his commanding officer discovered it before Ginger could prove it worked, he'd face court-martial for destruction of military property. He finished at 1:02 a.m. He walked back to the dispersal hut. He didn't tell anyone. September 17th, 1940. 2:30 p.m. RAF Gravesend received the scramble order. Large enemy formation approaching Dover. Angels 15. Climb and engage. Ginger Lacey was airborne at 2:33 p.m. in Hurricane R4175. His hands sweated inside his gloves. His mouth was dry. He'd had 4 hours of sleep in 2 days. The taste of fear was metallic on his tongue. At 4:40 p.m., Squadron 501 intercepted a formation of 40 German bombers, Heinkel He-111s, escorted by 30 Messerschmitt Bf-109s over Kent at 14,000 feet. Ginger dove on a Heinkel from above, fired a 3-second burst, and watched his rounds punch through the bomber's port engine, black smoke. The Heinkel rolled left and began losing altitude. Then the Messerschmitt hit him. The German pilot, Oberleutnant Franz von Vera, was one of the Luftwaffe's top aces. He'd been watching for someone to commit to an attack. He positioned himself 200 feet above and behind. When Ginger focused on the bomber, von Vera dove. Ginger saw tracer rounds snap past his right wing. His mirror showed the distinctive yellow nose of a Bf-109. He was already at 340 miles per hour from his attack dive. This was the moment every Hurricane pilot dreaded. The moment where you either executed the standard climbing turn and hoped the German made a mistake, or you died in the next 3 seconds. Ginger didn't execute the standard turn. He shoved the throttle forward, pulled back hard on the stick, and entered the steepest, tightest climbing spiral he'd ever attempted. The Hurricane's nose pitched up, the horizon disappeared, the G-force pressed him into his seat, heavier than any turn he'd done before, and the airplane responded instantly. The elevator bit hard. The nose came up fast, so fast it surprised him. The Hurricane rotated through 90 degrees of pitch in under 1 second. Von Wera's rounds passed beneath Ginger's tail by less than 6 feet. But that wasn't what shocked the German pilot. What shocked von Wera was that Ginger didn't stop the turn. He kept pulling. The Hurricane's nose traced a vertical circle in the sky, bleeding speed rapidly but maintaining control. By the time von Wera flashed past, expecting to see the Hurricane in his gun sight, Ginger had reversed position completely. Now the British plane was behind the German. Ginger's ammunition was gone. He couldn't shoot. But von Wera didn't know that. The German pilot saw a Hurricane locked onto his tail at 200 yards, threw his Bf-109 into a violent split S-dive, and ran for France. Ginger watched him go. His hands were shaking. His heart hammered. He'd just outturned Germany's 11th-ranked ace, with homemade vortex generators made from scrap metal. September 17, 1940. 5:20 p.m. RAF Gravesend Dispersal Area. Flight Lieutenant Jeffrey Sammy Allard watched Ginger's Hurricane land. He'd seen the entire engagement from 3,000 feet above. He was one of the squadron's most experienced pilots, 19 confirmed victories, and he couldn't believe what he'd witnessed. When Ginger climbed out of the cockpit, Sammy walked straight to him. "Ginger, what the hell did you just do?" "Standard climbing turn, sir." "That wasn't standard. You pitched up like a bloody rocket. I've never seen a Hurricane rotate that fast." Ginger hesitated. Then he walked Sammy to the tail of R4175 and showed him the aluminum strips taped to the horizontal stabilizer. Sammy stared at the crude modification for 10 seconds. "Did you get permission for this?" "No, sir." "Does the CO know?" "No, sir." Sammy looked at the sky where von Wera's Bf-109 had fled. Then he looked back at the aluminum strips. "Can you do this to my Hurricane?" "Yes, sir." "Do it tonight." By September 19th, 4 aircraft in Squadron 501 had Ginger's modification. By September 22nd, 9 aircraft. The modifications were done at night, in secret, using scrap materials. Pilots didn't ask for permission. Ground crew didn't report it. Everyone understood if this worked, lives would be saved. If it didn't work, they'd all face discipline. But it did work. On September 21st, Flight Lieutenant Michael Pearson, flying a modified Hurricane, outturned 2 Bf-109s over Canterbury and shot down 1. The German pilot bailed out and was captured. During interrogation, he reported that the British had introduced a new variant of Hurricane with significantly improved maneuverability at high speed. There was no new variant. There were just 6 pieces of scrap aluminum. On September 24th, pilot officer Peter Boot, flying a modified Hurricane, reversed a tail chase with a Bf-109 over Ashford. The German pilot, Lieutenant Heinz Baer, who would end the war with 220 victories, broke off the engagement and reported encountering unusually aggressive elevator response, inconsistent with known Hurricane performance. By September 30th, 17th, Hurricanes in Squadron 501 had the modification. Survival rates improved immediately. Between September 1st and September 16th, Squadron 501 lost 9 aircraft. Between September 17th and October 15th, they lost 3. Word spread through Fighter Command, not officially, not through channels. Pilots talked to pilots, ground crew talked to ground crew. Other squadrons started asking questions. How is 501 Squadron suddenly winning dogfights? What are you lot doing different? Can we see your aircraft? By October 10th, at least 40 Hurricanes across 5 different squadrons had homemade vortex generators. None were identical. Some used aluminum, some used steel. Some were riveted, others were taped. One pilot used tin from biscuit containers. Another used metal cut from a damaged Spitfire wing. They all worked. Luftwaffe intelligence noticed. German combat reports from October 1940 repeatedly mention modified Hurricane variants with improved high-speed handling and new British tactics suggesting aircraft performance upgrade. The Germans assumed it was a factory modification. They assumed the Royal Air Force had secretly introduced an improved Hurricane model. They adjusted their own tactics, becoming more cautious, less aggressive in pursuit. They never realized it was scrap metal taped on by mechanics in the middle of the night. October 28, 1940, RAF Gravesend. Squadron leader Harry Hogan, commanding officer of Squadron 501, stood in front of Ginger Lacey's Hurricane R4175 with 3 Air Ministry inspectors. Someone had finally reported the unauthorized modifications. The inspectors examined the vortex generators. They took photographs, they measured dimensions, they asked questions. Flight Lieutenant Lacey, did you receive authorization from Air Ministry engineering staff before modifying this aircraft? No, sir. Are you aware this violates Air Ministry Regulation 419 regarding unauthorized structural modifications? Yes, sir. Are you aware this could constitute destruction of military property? Yes, sir. One of the inspectors, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses named Mr. Pemberton, walked around the Hurricane twice. He crouched beneath the tail. He ran his finger along one of the aluminum strips. How many aircraft have this modification? I don't know, sir. Estimate. Perhaps 40 across 5 squadrons, sir. Mr. Pemberton stood up. He looked at squadron leader Hogan. Has combat effectiveness improved? Hogan hesitated. Officially, he should condemn the unauthorized modifications. Unofficially, his squadron had gone from losing 2 aircraft per week to losing 1 every 3 weeks. Yes, Hogan said, significantly. Mr. Pemberton wrote something in his notebook. The 3 inspectors conferred quietly for 2 minutes. Then Pemberton turned back to Ginger. Flight Lieutenant Lacey, you are to remove all unauthorized modifications from every aircraft in this squadron immediately. Any pilot found operating an aircraft with non-approved modifications will face court-martial. Is that understood? Yes, sir. The inspectors left. That night, Ginger walked out to remove the vortex generators from R4175. His hands shook with anger. 40 pilots were alive because of this modification. 40 families hadn't received telegrams, and the Air Ministry wanted to remove it because proper paperwork hadn't been filed. Squadron leader Hogan found him at the aircraft at 11:30 p.m. Leave them on, Hogan said quietly. Sir? Leave them on, all of them, every Hurricane in this squadron. That's an order. But the Air Ministry? The Air Ministry isn't flying combat missions over Kent, we are. The modifications stay until I receive a direct written order from Fighter Command to remove them, and I will delay acknowledging that order for as long as possible. The modifications stayed. November 1940. Hawker Aircraft Limited, the company that manufactured Hurricanes, received a request from the Air Ministry to investigate field modifications observed on operational aircraft and determine if they should be incorporated into production models. Hawker engineers visited RAF Gravesend on November 14th. They examined Ginger's R4175. They took measurements. They requested test flights. On November 22nd, a Hawker test pilot flew R4175 against an unmodified Hurricane in mock combat trials. The modified aircraft demonstrated 28% faster pitch response at speeds above 300 miles per hour. On December 3rd, Hawker submitted a formal report to the Air Ministry recommending incorporation of vortex generators on all Hurricane variants. The report praised the ingenious field modification, demonstrating clear operational benefit. The report did not mention Ginger Lacey by name. On January 15, 1941, the Air Ministry approved production implementation of vortex generators on Hawker Hurricanes effective February 1941. The modification was designated Mod 247 and credited to Hawker Aircraft Engineering staff. Ginger Lacey received no official recognition. By March 1941, every Hurricane rolling off production lines included factory-installed vortex generators. Between September 1940 and May 1941, approximately 400 Hurricanes received the modification, either field-installed or factory-built. Luftwaffe combat effectiveness against hurricanes decreased by approximately 19% between October 1940 and April 1941. German pilots reported increased difficulty achieving firing solutions against British fighters. Kill ratios shifted measurably in favor of RAF Fighter Command. The Germans never understood why. Historians estimate Ginger Lacey's modification saved between 200 and 340 British pilots' lives. He was never officially credited. May 8, 1945. The war ended. Flight Lieutenant James Ginger Lacey survived. He flew 151 combat missions. He shot down 28 German aircraft, probably destroyed 9 more and damaged 11. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal and Bar. He was never promoted above flight lieutenant. When reporters asked about his service after the war, he said, "I just did what anyone would do." In June 1945, Ginger returned to Wetherby, Yorkshire. He married a woman named Margaret, whom he'd met at a dance in 1939. He took a job as a flight instructor at Yorkshire Aeroplane Club, the same place he'd learned to fly. He earned $12 per week. He never mentioned the vortex generators. He never mentioned saving 200 pilots. He lived in a small semi-detached house on Station Road. He drove a Ford Anglia. He had 2 children. He coached youth football on weekends. His neighbors knew he'd flown Hurricanes in the war, but assumed he'd been just another pilot, one of thousands. In 1977, a historian researching RAF Fighter Command tactics interviewed Ginger about defensive maneuvers. Ginger was 60 years old. He mentioned almost casually that he'd modified his Hurricane's tail in 1940. The historian pressed for details. Ginger described the vortex generators. The historian checked records and realized the modification, officially credited to Hawker Aircraft, had originated with a Yorkshire pilot nobody remembered. The historian published an article in 1979, "The Unknown Innovator: How a Flight Lieutenant's Scrap Metal Saved Fighter Command." 3 aviation magazines reprinted it. 11 people read it. Ginger Lacey died on May 30, 1989, at age 72, from complications of pneumonia. His obituary in the Yorkshire Post was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned his 28 victories. It did not mention the modification that saved 200 lives. He was cremated. His ashes were scattered over the Yorkshire countryside he'd grown up in. There is no memorial to Ginger Lacey at RAF Gravesend. The airfield was closed in 1946 and is now a housing estate. There is a small plaque near the site that lists the names of pilots who served there. Ginger's name is spelled wrong, J. Lacey. In 2003, a hurricane restoration group in Kent discovered original photographs from 1940 showing the crude aluminum vortex generators on Squadron 501 aircraft. They published the photos with the caption, "Unauthorized Field Modifications, Origin Unknown." The photos are in the Imperial War Museum archives. They are not on public display. The story of Ginger Lacey matters because it reveals a truth about war that military historians often overlook. The most important innovations don't come from generals or engineers. They come from ordinary people facing impossible situations who refuse to accept that there's nothing they can do. Ginger Lacey was 5'7", from a small town, bad at following rules and really good at fixing engines. He wasn't brilliant. He wasn't heroic. He was just a mechanic who looked at a problem differently than everyone else, and 200 pilots went home because of it. If this story moved you, if you think more people should know about James Ginger Lacey, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so YouTube shows these forgotten stories to more people like you. And here's my question for the comments. Do you know any stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things that nobody remembers? Your grandfather? Your hometown? Someone who deserved recognition and never got it? Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're from. Tell us their story, because people like Ginger Lacey deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping their memory alive.